You can't begin to understand the man who would become Pope Francis without first understanding this place, what are known as the villas of Buenos Aires. Often called the city's slums, these villas are a world apart from St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And yet, to Jorge Mario Bergoglio, these were sacred spaces. Bergoglio believed the church's place was here, close to the poor, walking beside the forgotten and the overlooked. And even though he was the powerful Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he didn't arrive with fanfare or wear robes, but arrived alone, carrying a small black bag to visit families, to listen, to bless, and to simply be with the people.
We got to know him because he would come here a lot. He would come at 8 in the morning and together with Father Toto would walk through the neighborhood until 8 or 9 at night.
Lorenzo de Vidia is the local parish priest here in the notorious neighborhood Villa 21. But to the locals, he's known affectionately as Father Toto. Father, what's the situation like in this neighborhood for the people who live here? What are the living conditions like?
This is a working class neighborhood, and it's full of life. A lot of partying, a strong sense of community. And here a mother is a mother not only to her own children, but to all the children on her street. The slum really is one big family. But there are problems that cast shadows over it. One is drugs, which kills young people. The other is infrastructure. There is a lack of water, sewers, proper electrical systems, and there is no natural gas. The slums are not connected up to the city's main infrastructure. It's like another village in Buenos Aires.
Father Toto would walk with Bergoglio through the neighborhood, day and night. What are your memories of Bergoglio coming here? What do you remember about him moving around and meeting the people?
Bergoglio showed us another face of how the church connects with the poor. Historically, the church was far away from neighborhoods like this, especially the bishops. But Jorge Bergoglio started to come here when he was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. This was very unusual. Archbishops never came here.
He didn't like luxury at all, no. Sometimes, when he finished Mass late, my son would give him a ride home. Otherwise, he would just take the bus. He was very simple. No private cars, no taxis, nothing fancy. Only the bus.
This was the Bergoglio that the people of Villa 21 would get to know, and the Bergoglio that the world would soon meet. Welcome to Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina. And over the next hour, we'll be traveling across this beautiful city, uncovering the roots of Jorge Mario Bergoglio. We'll walk the streets he walked. We'll meet the people who worked closely with him to discover what his life here was like. Yes, from the little boy raised in the sprawling suburbs to the man who would become the spiritual leader of over 1 billion people around the world. This is the story of Bergoglio, the man who would become Pope Francis. In the quiet suburb of Flores, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born on December 17, 1936, to Mario and Regina, working-class immigrants from Italy. Today I've come to visit this quiet neighborhood, which in many ways still remains locked in time. Here I'm meeting Arminda Aragon, who is taking me somewhere special. And walking through these vibrant streets, you really feel like you are walking through Latin American history. And she brings me to the home where Bergoglio grew up. What are your memories of him running around here as a young boy?
I remember that he and his friends were always sitting at a little table in the atrium, or sometimes they would be around the street corners. He was always doing missionary work. You could tell that he really was a boy with a religious and missionary vocation. I mean, he was cheerful and happy.
Now, Arminda, there's a rumor going around that you and Jorge were boyfriend and girlfriend. Is this true?
No, I was never his girlfriend, even though the parish priest would always say that I was. But he did have a girlfriend at the time, but he was not meant to be a fiancé. He was meant to be a priest. He was a cute boy, though. The girls liked him.
As Arminda walks me to the nearby park where Bergoglio once played, it's easy to imagine a young boy kicking a ball on these streets. And in the park where he spent his childhood, a plaque now marks the spot, connecting his humble beginnings in Flores to his role as future pope.
This is the small square where he would play. And on the plaque it says, "In this square the children of the neighborhood would gather, and it was here that Jorge Mario Bergoglio would run after a ball with his friends. There were afternoons of games, meetings, and friendships." It is so beautiful.
Beautiful. But it would be later in life, as Bergoglio grew too old to play in the park, that his mind and heart was focused elsewhere. Arminda brings me inside the stunning church of San Jose de Flores and to the confessional, where Bergoglio is said to have really discovered his vocation.
Jorge Bergoglio was a member of Catholic Action, a Catholic youth group, and I was in the same group. And one day we were walking to go for a picnic. When he passed this church, Jorge saw that there was an older priest there in his confessional, and something inside him felt a calling. So he didn't go to the picnic. Instead, he came in here to confess, and that's where we think his vocation really began.
On that day in 1953, Bergoglio's decision to go to confession instead of joining a picnic, many believe is the moment that started his journey to the priesthood and ultimately the Vatican. To get a fuller picture of Bergoglio's life, we're meeting someone who's followed his story closely for decades. Sergio Rubin is a veteran journalist here in Argentina and was the first person to write a biography of Bergoglio entitled The Jesuit, which was released in 2010, detailing Bergoglio's younger life. Did he have one singular passion? Was there something that he was very interested in or passionate about?
Yo no sé si tenía alguna pasión en particular.
I don't know if he had one particular passion. Of course, he was into sports, football, and basketball, but I wouldn't say these were great passions of his. Nothing really stood out in particular, but you could say he had an interest in public affairs, in the life of Argentinians, even from a young age. Sometimes young people are very detached and they don't care very much about what's going on around them, but not him. He cared.
Por la vida de los argentinos.
That interest in public affairs would later influence his work as a priest and archbishop, though it also brought challenges. And it's also one of the reasons Rubin believes he chose to enter the Jesuit order.
He ultimately chose the Jesuits because he liked the discipline, the forward-thinking mindset, and also due to his missionary calling. And so when he entered the Jesuits, he began a very strong religious journey. He had said that he also went through some periods of darkness in his faith, just like anyone. But he felt those times ultimately made his faith stronger.
Bergoglio entered seminary in 1958 and was ordained on December the 13th, 1969. As a priest, he quickly became known for his simplicity, humility, and commitment to the poor. The 1970s rolled in, and the country of Argentina started to go through severe turbulence, also known as the Dirty War. From 1976 to 1983, Argentina's military dictatorship led to the disappearance of thousands of people. The Catholic Church was under pressure, with some accused of supporting the regime and others resisting it. And Bergoglio, then a Jesuit leader, faced serious accusations related to this period.
The church kept calling for dialogue for both sides to reach an agreement. Then a new president took office, Nestor Kirchner, followed by his wife, Cristina Kirchner. They were very confrontational, very combative, and that didn't sit well with Bergoglio. That's when tensions arose between the Kirchners and Bergoglio, a confrontation that became quite intense. At one point, the Kirchners even promoted a campaign accusing him of being complicit with the military dictatorship, saying that he had handed over 2 priests from his order, meaning that he had betrayed them to the regime. In fact, he had to testify in court as a witness, and if something wasn't clear, he could have been charged.
Bergoglio not only clashed with government authorities, but he was also controversial within the Jesuits. As provincial superior from 1973 to 1979, he was seen as approachable and humble by lay people, yet strict and disciplined by those within the order. His decisiveness and conservative stance often clashed with more progressive members. And even after stepping down as provincial, tensions over his leadership continued, and in 1990 he was reassigned to the Argentinian city of Córdoba for 2 years, a move that was widely considered an internal exile and a chance for reflection.
Of course, he did not hand over those priests. In fact, he even warned them that they were in danger because they were working in the slums in a highly exposed area. Because at that time, the military regime believed there were communists and terrorists in those areas and wanted to abduct them. So Bergoglio told them, be careful. But they continued working there anyway and were kidnapped. And Bergoglio did everything he could to get them released. And a few months later, they were freed. In a way, it was like an exile for him because he was having some differences with the new leadership of the Jesuits here in Argentina. He already had a strong leadership presence, especially among a certain sector of the Jesuit community, not imposed, but natural. And so the new authorities decided to send him to Cordoba, about 800 kilometers from Buenos Aires. He felt very isolated. He was quite alone. And he has said that he experienced moments of darkness there, deep questioning. But in the end, those experiences served to strengthen and confirm his faith and helped him to continue on his religious path.
After being removed from positions of leadership within the Jesuits, Bergoglio was moved here to the city of Cordoba, around 400 miles from Buenos Aires. And over the next 2 years, he devoted himself to a life of prayer, of reading and hearing confessions. And he would later describe this as a time of deep personal and spiritual turmoil, a period of inner purification. Cardinal Angel Rossi, now the seminary's rector here in Cordoba, worked with Bergoglio, and he remembers being inspired by his leadership.
There
was always a fatherly dimension to the relationship. We weren't colleagues in the sense of equals, but we were close.
He always wanted to set an example, and I know that once during a spiritual retreat, he told you, stop, go outside and do what?
Yes, that was an experience that says a lot about what he was like, his concern for the poorest, and also the kind of formation he wanted us Jesuits to have. We were on retreat in silence and prayer, and he called me to his room and asked how I was doing on the retreat. I said, fine. Are you eating well? Yes. Is your room warm? Yes. I was surprised by his questions. Then he said, all right, stop the retreat. There's a woman at the door with 5 children. They're on the street with no roof, no food. We can't be in here praying while they're out there. So leave the retreat. And when that woman and her kids have a place to stay, then you can return to it. And so he sent me out. And thankfully, maybe because I felt so driven, we found them shelter quickly. But that shows how seriously he took his concern for the poor. We were being formed to understand you don't play around with service to the poor. It's something to be lived with seriously.
There was another occasion when Cardinal Rossi returned home early after being out in the neighborhood helping the poor.
It was winter, cold and raining in a very poor area, and there was no one on the street. It was freezing. So I thought, what am I doing here? I went back to the seminary about an hour early, thinking there wasn't much more I could do. When I got there, he was walking by the door praying. He saw me arrive, checked his watch, and said, "You stole an hour of service from your people. Go back to the neighborhood." He was a man of deep spirituality and a man of leadership, 2 dimensions that are hard to bring together. Usually someone is very spiritual and not a man of governance, and someone very political is not usually very spiritual.
It was that style of leadership, his humility and attentiveness to the poor, that would really start to shine when he was appointed Auxiliary Bishop of Buenos Aires in 1992, a role that elevated his influence within the Catholic Church in Argentina and amplified his voice. His influence grew, but so did the challenges he faced in Argentina's complex political landscape. To further understand Bergoglio, we wanted to track down the people who worked closest with him when he became the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. This is a picture that captured the humility and simplicity of Bergoglio. Despite now being the powerful Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he always wanted to be close to the people, captured here riding the city subway in 2008, rather than using a driver and a car. But looking closer at the picture, you'll see a young man sitting beside him. It was then his new 26-year-old assistant, Federico Wolz. Today, 27 years later, Federico is riding that exact same subway line. And back then, as he sat there, little did he know that the bishop he had just started working for would someday go on to become Pope.
Federico, the subway has changed a lot since those days.
Yes, it's true. A lot has changed. There were older wooden carriages back then, and now they're much newer trains. But this is the very same subway line we're riding.
Do you remember that moment?
Yes, I remember it well. We were going to a celebration of Corpus Christi. And you know, people wouldn't recognize him on the subway. Sometimes they might take a second look and say, I wonder, is that really him?
St. Peter's. The station is called St. Peter's?
Federico was young and inexperienced, but Bergoglio was patient, offering advice and support. And as they worked together, Federico saw how Bergoglio balanced authority with kindness.
Well, at 26, I was probably the youngest on his team, and because of my age and lack of experience, there were times when I would do something wrong and he would let it pass. In fact, he would give me advice just like a father would. He would accompany me gently and show me the way with compassion.
What was he like as a boss? Was he easy to work with? Could he be difficult at times? And you're laughing now.
Well, let's see. If I'm being honest, he was not always an easy boss. But at the same time, he was not a very difficult boss. He was a boss who would tell you clearly how he wanted things done. But then, he would also teach you. If you had a suggestion, he would listen, but always make the final decision. He would have said something like, I like your idea, but it has to be done this way, and here's why.
What would you say you learned from him?
You know, I learned to trust in the providence of God. Because I was young, I used to think that God wasn't enough. I had to do it for myself. But he taught me to leave things in God's hands and that he will take care of things. And he showed me how to look more closely at others. For example, when a beggar on the street asked him for money, he would stop to give it, but he would also ask, "What is your name?" It was beautiful.
Bergoglio's habit of asking people their name, even beggars, showed his belief in everyone's dignity. And it was a lesson that Federico carried with him, both in his work and his personal life. It was here in the city's cathedral that Bergoglio spent some of the most defining years of his life. And as Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he was one of the most powerful Catholics in all of Argentina. And yet, despite this, he still chose to live a life of austerity. Father Alejandro Russo, now the cathedral's rector, worked with Bergoglio during his time as Archbishop. What do you remember about his personality and his character, the man that he was?
First of all, he was very approachable, always warm and very perceptive. He was also incredibly hardworking. He would wake up at 4 in the morning, and by 7 he was already at work. He kept a strong pace, and he didn't have a private secretary. He answered his own letters. If someone called to request a meeting, he'd arrange it himself. He could sometimes be in a rush. I remember one day at 11 a.m. he called me and said, "Alejandro, I need this. This is a legal document." Then at 2 p.m., the same day, he called back and said, "Is it ready?" I said, "Your Eminence, we're still at our desks. We haven't moved. Meanwhile, you've already eaten and taken a 20-minute nap. Give us a little time. We'll get it done." And he laughed. He was aware of his impatience.
Bergoglio's hard work ethic would prove to be essential, as in the early 2000s, Argentina was in turmoil. Political corruption, economic collapse, and social unrest gripped the nation. There was always so much to do, and Bergoglio emerged as a vocal critic of government excess and injustice. He denounced poverty and human trafficking and publicly challenged the country's political elite, including Presidents Nestor and Cristina Kirchner. Some said he went too far, others said he didn't go far enough. And it was here, in this very cathedral, that Bergoglio would give his sermons that would echo throughout the country. And in society at large, in terms of politics and the political class, did he walk a fine line in terms of calling out things that he thought were wrong in society and with the upper class?
Well, Argentina has a very particular history when it comes to how the church participates in or influences political life, but he always made his voice heard, especially through his homilies and his remarks during the Te Deum. Here in Argentina, we have a tradition. On May 25th and July 9th, our 2 national holidays, the Archbishop of Buenos Aires gives a formal address during a special liturgical celebration. It's called the Te Deum. Usually, the Archbishop gives gospel imagery to shed light on the national situation. And Bergoglio did this with incredible skill. Each Te Deum he delivered had a very special meaning, and they often had a strong impact. In fact, the government would always pay close attention because what the bishop said could help or hurt them, and they were worried about the political echo of his words. It was always something the political class paid attention to.
It was during this time of political unrest that Bergoglio's sermons at the cathedral called out corruption and poverty, making him a controversial figure among the country's leaders. And Bergoglio made deliberate choices to separate the church from what he saw as political displays.
Sometimes he even broke with traditions that could appear too closely tied to a political image. For example, the Corpus Christi procession always used to be led by the mayor of Buenos Aires. who carried the ceremonial banner at the front. One day he told me, "Tomorrow there will be no banner." I said, "Your Eminence, they're going to kill us. This tradition goes back to colonial times. Once it's gone, it's gone." And he said, "Just say it was my decision. When a new archbishop comes, he can do what he wants, but this is done." That was a tough negotiation with the city government. They weren't happy about it. Here's another small but meaningful gesture. Until then, both the president and mayor would stand next to the archbishop during the national anthem. This was typically at big liturgical events like Corpus Christi or the Te Deum, but he ended that too. From then on, political leaders stayed in their places, and the archbishop greeted them afterwards. They no longer stood beside him during the anthem.
Away from the noise of political fights and the demands of running the archdiocese, Bergoglio often found peace in places like this. The Carmelite monastery tucked away in the heart of the city. This place is situated in the difficult neighbourhood of Constitucion, where there is trafficking and prostitution. The sisters here live a life of silence, of prayer and contemplation. And it may seem a world apart from the bustle of Buenos Aires, but for Bergoglio, these visits were essential. Sister Carmen and Sister Sandra remember how Archbishop Bergoglio would call on the phone to speak to the prioress.
The one thing I always remember is how I put my foot in it. It was in 2002, and I was put in charge of answering the phone. And he always called personally, never through a secretary. So I answered the landline, and he asked, "Can I speak to the prioress?" And I replied, "Who's calling?" Because we had strict instructions not to put just anyone through to the prioress. And he said, "Father Jorge." "Father Jorge?" I said, "Cardinal?" And he replied, "No, I am just a simple sparrow."
And Archbishop Bergoglio would call on other occasions. For example, in 2004, now a cardinal, when he called out of the blue to say that he would be over that afternoon to celebrate the anniversary of him becoming a Jesuit priest.
I panicked. The cardinal is coming. I called the prioress and Sister Marta, and instead of going to recreation, we started cleaning and preparing to receive him. It was one of the most beautiful days we shared. It was the anniversary of his simple profession as a Jesuit. We spent a long time talking, and we have a funny story about trying to get a photo of him, because he always avoided photos. We didn't have a single picture of the cardinal. Even though he was already a cardinal, he never wanted his photo in convents or parishes. So we said, "Let's take one ourselves and enlarge it. That way we'll always have one of him as cardinal."
But he wouldn't lift his head at all. He just kept it down.
Despite his playful objections, the sisters managed to snap a few precious photos of Cardinal Bergoglio, ducking the camera with a smile. The sisters remember him coming a number of times to speak with Sister Beatrice, the Mother Superior.
He loved her very much.
He would meet with her in the visiting room. He'd say, "Mother, what do you advise?" Or, "I have this problem," or "There's this challenge." He was very humble. I think he knew that we are rooted in the Archdiocese and we're shepherding from within, being a light in a very dark neighborhood where there is child trafficking, human trafficking, and prostitution. And he knew he could trust us, especially the prioress, and talk about things happening in the country or in public life. He could just discuss this with us.
Buenos Aires is a vibrant tapestry of faiths, home to Latin America's largest Jewish community, a growing Muslim population, and Christians of every tradition. For Archbishop Bergoglio, faith was not a barrier, but a bridge to unity. In 2002, he co-founded the Institute for Interreligious Dialogue, a pioneering effort in Argentina to foster understanding across religions during a time of political and social division. Father Guillermo Marco, co-president of the Institute, played a key role in guiding Bergoglio into this world of interfaith dialogue, helping him forge connections that would shape his legacy.
When Cardinal Bergoglio, Jorge Bergoglio, arrived in Buenos Aires as bishop, interreligious dialogue wasn't something that appeared in his writings or his pastoral work. It just wasn't a focus for him. When I began working with him in the press office, I was a spokesperson for 10 years, I began introducing him to that world.
Between 2004 and 2013, Father Guillermo Marco was Bergoglio's media spokesperson. He would have to speak on Archbishop Bergoglio's behalf, sometimes at very short notice.
But something that could be difficult, and it has to do with his personality and also his Jesuit formation, is that no one ever really knows what a Jesuit is thinking. Because he never shared the process of how he came to a decision. Usually, when he consulted you, he had already made the decision. He had worked through it internally, in his own mind, but he never told others. The people who say they knew how he thought, I don't believe that's true. I worked with him very closely. In fact, I think I was the person who worked most closely with him for the longest time. I knew him well. I'd even say we were friends, but I still have to admit that he really has a mysterious mind.
Not always knowing how his boss's mind worked often made the job challenging for Father Marco. And as his head of communications, he was all too aware that everything the Archbishop said would be published everywhere and would get a mixed reaction.
He wasn't exactly popular. He was respected. In fact, he was someone who, in Argentina, didn't smile very much publicly. We really only discovered his smile when he arrived in Rome, but in Argentina, his expressions were usually quite stern in photos, very serious. Among the clergy, especially in Buenos Aires, he was loved, very loved and respected. But to the general public, he wasn't a very popular figure. He was seen as more controversial because of his public statements, which were often strong. So, no, he wasn't popular in the broad sense.
No popular.
Father Marco, too, remembers the Te Deum Masses that would take place in the cathedral, attended by the Supreme Court justices, members of parliament, diplomats, military officials, and the president, and how Bergoglio's sermons would be front-page news the following day.
He wrote the homilies himself, and they were very tough on political power, very direct. We would send the homily a day in advance to the presidential office. And before doing that, I'd sit down and underline certain phrases, and I'd ask him, do you really want to say this? Are you sure? Because this will be front-page news tomorrow or the day after. And he'd say, yes, I want to say it. Then I'd say, all right, just don't tell me later that you didn't mean it. And well, President Nestor Kirchner came to the first Te Deum, never came again.
The sanctuary of Our Lady of Pompeii was a spiritual haven for Jorge Bergoglio, where he would come to pray and seek the sacrament of confession. And his confessor was Father Luis Pascual Dri, now a 98-year-old Capuchin friar and cardinal. He recalls a man whose heart was anchored in mercy, even during his years as Archbishop of Buenos Aires.
Your Eminence, you were the confessor of Bergoglio. What do you remember of him?
No te olvides que Jesús perdonó a todos
I remember that he always told me, don't forget, Jesus forgave everyone, so you also have to forgive everyone. He told me to keep thinking about mercy, and really that was his theme, mercy, to forgive, to love, to embrace. I think mercy was important to him because he saw so much misery and poverty around the slums. That touched his heart, I think, and being with those people gave him a real sense of mercy.
Father believes that Bergoglio's encounters with the suffering in Buenos Aires' slums shaped his profound emphasis on mercy, a theme that would go on to define his papacy later in life. And his regular visits to Our Lady of Pompeii, where he would pray and connect with the friars, reflected his deep devotion to Our Lady.
I know that Bergoglio had a special devotion to Our Lady of Pompeii. Is that why he would come here often?
He was very devoted to Our Lady of Pompeii, and so would always come here where he would see the friars, and they really liked him. If there was a feast or any kind of event, he was always here.
As Bergoglio's confessor, Father Dree shared with him intimate moments, listening to his struggles and his failings. Their conversations revealed Bergoglio's vision for a church that was rooted in humility and service to the poor.
As you got to know him very closely, what did you learn about his hopes and his dreams and his worries too? What was on his heart?
I think he really wanted to change the church, to make it more for the poor, so that we would not just have priests that preached about poverty, but we would be poor and be among the poor. He dreamed of a poor church for the poor and not a rich church that talked about the poor.
And it would be years later, after becoming Pope, that Francis would thank his friend for his closeness in a very special way, by making him a cardinal.
Well, I immediately imagined myself all dressed in red and thought, no, I don't want that. I want to be a friar with a brown habit and nothing else. But really, I got so emotional, I cried so much. I never thought this could happen, that a simple friar, born in the countryside, who took care of pigs and animals and cows, could be told someday, you are now a cardinal in the Catholic Church of God.
And when Cardinal Louis Pasquale Dree went to the Vatican to meet his old friend Bergoglio, who was now the successor of St. Peter and the head of the global Catholic Church, spiritual leader for over 1.4 billion people, what was the first thing he asked?
When I visited Pope Francis in Casa Santa Marta, the first thing he asked me was, so will you hear my confession? And after I did, he asked me for absolution. It really showed his humility, because here was the Pope coming to confession with a simple Capuchin friar. But that's the way he wanted it, and that's it.
Argentinians are not just passionate about football, they live it. In fact, for many people here, football is a type of faith. And Bergoglio was a huge fan of San Lorenzo. It's a club with a very deep Catholic history. The fans call their players the Crows, a nickname born from their founder's black cassock. And Father Lorenzo started the club as a way to give boys on the streets something to work towards. And inside the stadium, a small chapel offers Mass before every match. Marcelo Moretti is the club manager.
The
history of San Lorenzo is quite unique, very rich. It's truly moving. It was founded on April 1st, 1908, where Father Lorenzo Massa took children off the street. They were playing football on a street where a tram passed, and one day a tram struck a child. So Father Massa invited them to play at the parish, at the San Antonio Oratory, instead of the street. From there, it became a football team called Los Forzosos de Almagro.
Over the years, it grew and expanded into the club of San Lorenzo. And the story of how it started captured the hearts of Argentinians, including Bergoglio's. the club's social mission mirroring his own lifelong dedication to the poor.
Well, Bergoglio was a person who always helped the poor, the most in need. And right across the street is a villa where many children live, not just Argentinians, but also immigrants from neighboring countries. And we're always looking for ways to include them in sports at San Lorenzo. That social connection is something we take seriously.
Today, the club is the third largest in Argentina, but they were always proud that Bergoglio, Pope Francis, was their most famous fan. It was even rumored that he was still paying his membership fee from Rome. And just next to the stadium, on the grounds, is the San Antonio Chapel. And to this day, it remains a sacred space where faith and football intertwine. Oscar Lucchini is the chapel's architect.
The chapel isn't laid out in a straight line, like big churches usually are. It's built in a semicircular form. We call it a hemicycle. Why? Because the altar is where the celebration takes place, the body and blood of Christ. It's a meal, like in the Jewish tradition, and everyone gathers around the table to take part in that meal. Bergoglio liked that design. I remember that. Back then, there were more benches arranged in a perfect hemicycle when he came. They were beautiful moments.
This is beautiful. Jorge Bergoglio always had a special place in his heart for young people. And one of those young people was Sebastian Garcia Ayanis. He was a member of the youth Catholic group called Catholic Action and formed an unexpected friendship with the then Cardinal Bergoglio after interviewing him for a journalism project. So he was cardinal here?
Yeah.
Cardinal.
The first time I met Jorge Mario Bergoglio was at a diocesan event around 2006 or 2007. From that point on, I would see him at every activity and every parish feast day. Honestly, he was a person with enormous warmth and closeness. Even though I knew him through Catholic Action, we started to become closer because I was studying journalism at the time, and I had the idea of interviewing him about the situation the country was facing in 2008. And he agreed. So we met at the Archbishop's residence. And from that first day, his warmth made a big impression on me. It left a mark. After that, we kept meeting and developed a close relationship. He always found time for everyone.
Pope Francis has been quoted as saying that the young are not the future of the church. They're the now of the church, the present. From dealing with Cardinal Bergoglio, did you get that sense that he wanted to push the young and the youth and he was supporting you?
Yes, absolutely. Young people were at the center of his pastoral ministry even when he was a cardinal. There was a kind of magnetism between them and the cardinal. He would tell us things like, "Don't waste your life." I remember in 2009 or 10, the country was debating the legalization of marijuana, a very complex issue, and he immediately stepped forward to challenge us on that. I remember a very nice phrase he said. Right nearby, they're thinking about how to get all the young people hooked on drugs. And the truth is, let them keep the drugs for themselves. Meaning, you shouldn't get involved in that. Honestly, that was a very nice moment because he encouraged us and also accompanied us like a father, like a very close father to young people, like a dad.
Bergoglio's fatherly guidance extended to personal matters too, as he counseled Sebastian through vocational questions, shaping his journey towards family life and fatherhood.
That closeness and humility also shaped me into who I am today, as a father. When I talked to him at that time, 12 or 15 years ago, I was wondering if I had a vocation, wondering whether I was going to be a priest or be a family man. And I think at that time he wanted me to be a priest. But then God and the Holy Spirit led me to become a father.
Bergoglio's commitment to fostering dialogue across faiths also left a lasting impact. Through the Institute for Interreligious Dialogue, he built bridges with leaders like Omar Aboud, a Muslim and co-president of the Institute, whose friendship with Bergoglio grew into a powerful symbol of unity.
Among the many teachings of Bergoglio, there's one I remember well. He used to say the whole is greater than the parts, and unity is greater than conflict. He believed that while preserving the particular identity of each faith, it was essential to build dialogue. I believe there is a before and after when it comes to Bergoglio and Pope Francis and the issue of interreligious dialogue. Before, when you saw photos of three religions together, it was surprising. People asked, why are they meeting? What for? And after Pope Francis, now it's something normal.
That friendship between Bergoglio and Aboud deepened after 2013, culminating in a historic moment when Pope Francis invited Aboud to join him on his 2014 visit to the Holy Land, something Aboud saw as a powerful gesture.
I always felt like a witness. His idea was to show that dialogue was necessary, and in a place as sacred as Jerusalem, which is holy for Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, to stand in front of such a symbolic place. It was clearly sending a transcendent message, and I was simply a witness who was blessed to accompany him. Sometimes you wonder whether you're worthy of such an honor.
We heard today that Pope Benedict will be called Emeritus Pope, and we got a few other details about his life. We know he's going to be spending time at a monastery in contemplative prayer.
When Pope Benedict XVI resigned in 2013, it sent shockwaves around the world. For the first time in 600 years, a pontiff was stepping down from the seat of Peter. And even though there was no papal funeral to be had, there was a conclave needed to elect the new pope.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum, habemus papam.
And for the people who knew Bergoglio best, this was an incredible moment.
Buonasera.
And while there may have been scenes of jubilation from the church in Argentina and from the faithful, from the government, there was a more muted and subdued response.
Bueno, cuando fue electo Papa el 13 de marzo.
Well, when he was elected Pope on March 13th, 2013, I was in St. Peter's Square, but I could see how people were reacting in Argentina. And honestly, the whole country stopped. There was overwhelming emotion among the population. As people often say in Argentina, everyone remembers where they were when he was elected Pope. It was a hugely emotional moment for Argentinians. Probably less so for the then President Cristina Kirchner. For her, it was more of a blow. It was hard for her to acknowledge it. She said they've elected a Latin American pope, not even they've elected an Argentine pope.
A un argentino papa.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buongiorno.
And now that Jorge Mario Bergoglio was now Pope Francis, the eyes of the world were upon him, as well as media scrutiny. Those accusations made against him that he had helped the military during Argentina's dirty war resurfaced. This was when Pope Francis finally responded publicly to these accusations, and the person he spoke to about them was Sergio Rubin.
Now, I never saw him show signs of distress or anguish over those accusations, no. He tried to approach it with a Christian attitude. He would say, I'm being accused of things that aren't true, but I have to bear them before God. He saw it as carrying a cross.
Ahí decía, bueno, ahora voy a hablar.
El que dice que ayudó a los militares, miente.
Those who say he helped the military are lying. They don't know. And those who say he helped others, they're right. But in those days, he certainly helped those who were in real danger, and he put himself at risk to do so.
Poniendo en riesgo su propio pellejo.
Tensions with President Cristina Kirchner eased briefly in 2013 when she visited Pope Francis at the Vatican in Rome. Their warm embrace and exchange of gifts signaled a moment of reconciliation.
Cristina Kirchner, que era la presidenta en aquel momento.
Cristina Kirchner, who was president at the time, went to see him. She had been advised to change her stance completely, and so she made a complete 180-degree turn. She went to visit him in Santa Marta and said, I thought you were someone else. I asked you to help me. That gesture on her part was key. It was crucial. because the Pope interpreted it as an apology.
And Bergoglio would go on to meet another leader of Argentina who publicly called him a communist and equated him to evil, Javier Milei. They too met at the Vatican, where he apologized to the Pope for his past remarks.
More recently, President Javier Milei, who had insulted him in every possible way in the past, said he wanted to hug him, and Bergoglio said yes.
But for all the time Bergoglio spent with the poor and those in need and those on the margins here in Buenos Aires, and for the close relationships he had with so many he worked with and alongside, he never made it home after becoming Pope. And that has always been something of a mystery.
Pope Francis has traveled to South Sudan, to Iraq, to Mongolia, to Papua New Guinea, to other countries in Latin America, but not to his home country of Argentina. Why is that?
Well, the question of why he hasn't come to his home country is very much debated here. Why hasn't he come? Look, first you have to understand Jorge Bergoglio's mindset. Many people say he should have come within the first few months of being elected Pope. But for Bergoglio, that was unthinkable. To him, that would have meant prioritizing his own country, where he had already lived for 76 years, over other places he had never visited. But in my opinion, the deeper issue was the growing political divide, what we call la grieta, a very deep polarization. These divisions didn't just start then. They had been around, but they had worsened, and he himself was pulled into that divide.
Pope Francis has traveled all over the world, but he's never come home to Argentina. Why do you think that is?
That's the million-dollar question. You know, I think for us Argentinians, this is a good opportunity to address this, to do this interview on such a prestigious TV channel that will reach a Catholic audience all over the world. We Argentinians are rather particular, and I think we also have to ask ourselves why he never came home. Because when someone doesn't come to your house, it may also be because you didn't make them feel entirely welcome. And Argentina has been very critical of Pope Francis. In fact, I'd even say, being honest, that a large part of the Catholic flock in Argentina had been very critical of him. We must ask ourselves if we made him feel truly wanted.
As the evening sun sets over Buenos Aires, in one of the city suburbs, children play on a beautiful carousel. The mechanical music organ at the heart of these old carousels was once used to practice tango in years gone by, a music and a dance that a young Bergoglio had a great love for. And in a coffee shop overlooking the square, I'm meeting Jose Ignacio Bergoglio, Pope Francis's nephew.
Jose, I know you have a very fond memory of your uncle Bergoglio from your confirmation. What happened?
Well, I was so fortunate that my uncle gave me my first communion and confirmation. And during the confirmation, there was a tradition that the Archbishop would give each person a gentle and loving slap on the cheek. I stood in line with my classmates, but when it was my turn, he saw me. Jorge gave me a much harder blow. Then he winked at me and smiled. That's one of the things that I admired most about him, that he was able to turn a serious moment into something fun.
Para hacer de algo serio un momento también que se disfruta.
I remember that he was a great counselor for me. You see, I grew up without a father, and so he was one of the figures I looked to as a father figure. Someone who could advise you, who challenges you, who accompanies you. That was Jorge. He and my uncle Albert were the two most important men in my family, and he would also correct me when I made mistakes.
For the Bergoglio family, that ethos of looking after and encouraging each other is, Jose says, what also helped Jorge Mario Bergoglio deepen his faith and discover his vocation for the priesthood.
Without a doubt, it was his grandmother Rosa who was such a great influence on his religious vocation and his journey to the priesthood. She was the one who taught him about reading religious books and the one who supported him the most with his decision to love God and also all of mankind.
And when, in 2013, white smoke emerged from the chimney at the Vatican, Jose Ignatius Bergoglio watched live on TV in amazement as he heard his uncle's name being called and then the name Pope Francis.
I began to shake. I never expected that Jorge would be elected as the Pope. I was standing there right in front of the television in shock. Then all of a sudden the phone started ringing and ringing. But all we wanted was for the world to be quiet for a moment so we could comprehend what was happening. I realized then that Uncle Jorge was no longer just ours. He was now going to be everybody's Jorge.
Now he was everyone's Jorge. And although he never returned to visit his home country, it seems he never forgot about his old friends and those close bonds he had formed here in Buenos Aires. For example, the Carmelite sisters would get one last unexpected phone call from Bergoglio years later from the Vatican in Rome.
Then, overcome with emotion, I started ringing the bell, but the rope broke. I called out to those who were in the kitchen and those who were in the sacristy. Those on the upper floor thought that thieves had broken in because there was such a commotion. Mother Beatrice came down, all agitated, and I couldn't say anything to her. I just cried because it was the same voice as always.
Federico Wolz and his family would meet Pope Francis several times in Rome, no longer on the bustling subways of Buenos Aires, but in the heart of the Vatican.
These encounters were unforgettable, especially for my children, because they always heard me refer to him as Father in house growing up. But now they know that Father was the Pope. So for my whole family, it was very special.
And for Arminda Aragon, who never saw Bergoglio again after 2013, the memories of their shared childhood in Flores remain vivid.
What do you think of the fact that we are standing outside the very home where Pope Francis came from?
You really can't imagine the emotion to be in the place where he was born, where he grew up and played, and to think he became our Pope, a Pope for the world.
It's amazing. It's incredible.
Unbelievable. I remember when they announced he was Pope. I was watching TV with my sister, who has since passed away. When they said his name, we jumped. Our joy was something else. An Argentinian Pope. How unique for the world.
And in the city's tough neighborhoods, Bergoglio's legacy is tinged with sadness. His departure left a void in the villas, yet his presence as Pope continued to inspire everyone who knew him, like Norma.
When he became Pope, we were so happy, but also sad, because we knew he was leaving. I personally felt kind of abandoned. I thought, he's leaving and he won't come back. And that's exactly what happened. For us, it was such a blessing. He was so sensitive to people's needs. He brought us so much spiritual support. It felt like we had a protector. And we still do, because we say with pride, the Pope was here. He walked through our neighborhood. We're very proud of that.
Jorge Mario Bergoglio's life here in Buenos Aires was one that was marked by a genuine closeness to the people, especially the poor. And these beautiful encounters that he would have had undoubtedly went on to shape his papacy. And although he never made it home to Argentina, as you've seen, his legacy here lives on.
Until next time, thank you so much for watching this EWTN News Special. And from me, Colm Flynn, it's good night from Buenos Aires.